The dinner table was glowing with golden light, laughter bouncing off the walls as my family gathered for what was supposed to be a night of unity. My sister had gone all out, something she loved doing when she wanted to impress everyone. She had arranged personalized dinner boxes for each family member, beautifully wrapped with satin ribbons and embossed with our names in elegant letters. It felt like a celebration, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, this was her way of finally treating me as an equal. But when the boxes were passed around, I noticed the difference. My parents' boxes were large and luxurious. My brother's came with a golden trim, and my sister's own box sparkled like it was made for royalty. When mine landed in front of me, the laughter around the table seemed to grow louder. My name wasn't printed in gold, silver, or even simple ink. It was scribbled on with a black marker, sloppy and rushed, as if I was an afterthought. Everyone tried to hide their smirks, but the glances were enough. My sister leaned back in her chair, her eyes glinting with pride over the cruelty she thought was clever. The food inside my box was also different. Smaller portions, missing the special dessert everyone else had. For a second my throat tightened, and I felt that familiar sting of humiliation. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, but I knew better. This wasn't about dinner. It was about sending a message. You will never be good enough in this family. That night was supposed to bring us together, but instead, it shattered something inside me forever. I still remember the way the dining room glowed that night, the soft golden light bouncing off the crystal chandelier, giving everything a warm, almost magical feeling. My mother had lit tall candles on the table, their flames flickering gently as if the evening were about to be sacred. My father sat proudly at the head of the table, his face full of anticipation, while the rest of the family gathered around. My sister had planned this dinner for weeks, or so she made sure to remind everyone at least 3 times before we even sat down. She was the organizer, the perfectionist, the one who thrived when all eyes were on her. I, on the other hand, was simply the guest. Though I was supposed to be family, it rarely felt that way. From the start, the atmosphere was different. My sister had taken care to make the night appear flawless. Everything about it screamed luxury. The long table was draped with a rich velvet cloth in a deep maroon shade. Gold-rimmed plates sat perfectly aligned with silver cutlery polished to a shine. There were fresh flowers in crystal vases, their fragrance filling the air. Even the background music, a soft piano melody, seemed rehearsed and chosen carefully to set the mood. For a moment, I thought this was going to be one of those rare nights when my sister treated everyone equally, when perhaps I would not be the target of her subtle cruelty. But deep down I should have known better. The highlight of the evening was supposed to be the dinner boxes. My sister had hired a catering service that designed custom dinner boxes, each tailored to the person receiving it. She had spoken endlessly about how each box reflected the personality of its owner, how it was not just a meal but a statement of identity. My parents were excited, my brother was curious, and I felt uneasy. I had seen enough of her thoughtful gestures to know they always came with strings attached. The boxes were brought out one by one, presented like trophies. My father's was the first. It was grand and elegant, wrapped in deep navy paper with a golden trim. His name embossed in calligraphy that shimmered under the light. Inside was an extravagant meal. Prime cuts of steak, roasted vegetables arranged artistically, and a decadent chocolate dessert that looked like something out of a 5-star restaurant. My father beamed, clearly impressed, and praised my sister for her thoughtfulness. She basked in his approval like sunlight. Next came my mother's. Hers was wrapped in a soft rose gold paper with silver lettering. The design was feminine and graceful, perfectly aligned with her gentle personality. Inside she found her favorite dishes, grilled salmon, a side of fresh greens, and a small strawberry tart. My mother's eyes lit up, and she pressed my sister's hand with gratitude. Once again my sister's smile stretched wide, her performance flawless. Then it was my brother's turn. His box was bold and striking, decorated with a fiery red ribbon and shiny golden edges. His name shone brightly on the lid, and when he opened it, he found a hearty meal, barbecue ribs, cheesy potatoes, and his favorite chocolate fudge cake. He laughed in delight, clapping my sister on the back and teasing her about knowing him better than anyone else. The table erupted in cheerful laughter. Everyone was glowing with happiness, bonded by her supposed generosity. And then, it was my turn. The box placed in front of me looked nothing like the others. While theirs were wrapped with precision and elegance, mine was plain. A dull, cheap-looking cardboard box sat before me, not even sealed properly. Where their names had been embossed in gold or silver, mine had been scrawled across the top with a thick black marker, the letters uneven and crooked, as though someone had written it in haste. My chest tightened as I stared at it, my fingers frozen on the edge of the lid. I heard a few stifled laughs around the table. My brother shifted in his chair, smirking but trying not to laugh outright. My parents glanced at each other, their eyes darting quickly to my sister, who sat there with a sly, satisfied smile. She said nothing, letting the silence grow heavy. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to open it, to expose myself to whatever insult she had carefully planned. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, the difference was glaring. While everyone else had large, luxurious meals, mine was small and plain. A single piece of dry chicken, a scoop of plain rice, and a tiny salad sat awkwardly in the box. There was no dessert, no thoughtful arrangement, nothing that reflected me in any way. It wasn't just disappointing, it was humiliating. The air around me shifted. My parents looked uncomfortable, but neither said a word. My brother chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. My sister leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, watching me with cold amusement. "Special," she finally said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yours is different. Unique like you." The table erupted in polite laughter, though it was clear what the message was. My special box wasn't a gift. It was a symbol, a cruel reminder that no matter what I did, I would never belong at their table as an equal. My sister had orchestrated the entire night not to celebrate family, but to humiliate me in the most public, undeniable way. I sat there quietly, trying to hold myself together. My throat was dry, my hands stiff. For years, I had endured her little jabs, her subtle insults, the way she managed to push me aside without anyone else noticing. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, and done in front of the very people who were supposed to protect me. It wasn't just her cruelty that stung, it was their silence. As I forced myself to chew the bland food, I could feel every eye on me. My father quickly turned the conversation back to safer ground, praising my sister again for her creativity. My mother nodded along, though I caught the flicker of guilt in her eyes. My brother dug into his meal with enthusiasm, ignoring me completely. And my sister. She looked victorious, as if she had won some invisible battle. Inside me something cracked that night. The humiliation was sharp, but deeper than that was the realization that I had been fooling myself. For years, I thought that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, or proved myself worthy, maybe my family would see me differently. Maybe my sister would respect me. Maybe my parents would defend me. But staring at that sad little box, I knew the truth. I would never be enough for them, not because of who I was, but because of who they chose to be. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food, barely heard the chatter around me. My sister laughed louder than usual, her eyes flicking toward me every now and then, making sure her message had landed. And it had. That dinner box wasn't just food. It was a wall, a line drawn firmly between me and them. When I finally left the table and walked out into the night, the cool air hit my face like a wake-up call. My legs felt heavy, but my heart was strangely light. The pain was there, yes, but beneath it there was also clarity. That dinner had shown me what I had refused to admit for so long. I didn't belong, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they never wanted me to. And maybe it was time I stopped begging for a place at their table. The night after the dinner, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the events replaying over and over in my head like a cruel movie I couldn't pause. Every detail returned with painful clarity. The golden boxes, the elegant ribbons, the sparkling names, and then mine. a dull, scribbled box that sat like an insult in front of me. I could still hear the awkward laughter around the table, my sister's smug voice calling mine special, and the silence of my parents, which was louder than any insult spoken aloud. Sleep refused to come. Instead, I turned from side to side, my chest tightening as though the weight of the entire dinner box still sat on it. The thing that haunted me most wasn't the food itself. It wasn't even the black marker letters on the cardboard. What gnawed at me was the look in everyone's eyes when they saw it. My parents, who should have said something, who should have stopped her, chose to stay quiet. My brother, who once used to be my playmate, couldn't even resist smirking at my expense. And my sister, who had engineered the entire performance, sat there enjoying every second of my humiliation. That look of victory on her face seared itself into my memory, a reminder of where I stood in this family. Not as an equal, but as an easy target. The following morning, the house buzzed with casual normalcy, as if nothing had happened the night before. My mother hummed in the kitchen while preparing tea. My father sat in the living room with his newspaper. My sister was already on the phone with one of her friends, bragging about how well received the dinner had been. I sat quietly at the table, sipping my tea, my throat still tight from the unspoken words that had lodged themselves there all night. At one point, my mother looked at me briefly, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just turned back to the stove, stirring her pot. That silence, her silence, cut deeper than my sister's words, because it meant she had seen what happened, and she had chosen to do nothing. My father didn't even look up from his paper, and when my brother walked in, he slapped my back lightly and joked, "You always get the weird ones, don't you?" He laughed, but I didn't. My sister chuckled from across the room, her voice carrying easily, sharp and mocking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell them how cruel, how unfair, how humiliating it all was. But the words stuck. For years that had been my pattern, swallowing my pain, burying my protests, convincing myself that silence was safer. If I spoke, I risked being called dramatic, sensitive, or ungrateful. I knew how it would play out. They'd all dismiss me, and my sister would laugh even harder. So I said nothing. I drank my tea, put my cup in the sink, and retreated to my room. But silence doesn't heal wounds. It only buries them deeper until they rot inside you. And that day, as I sat in my room staring out of the window, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was done pretending. I was done waiting for them to see me, to value me, to treat me with even a fraction of the respect they so freely gave my sister. That dinner had been the final proof I needed. They weren't going to change. If I wanted peace, if I wanted dignity, it had to come from me, not from them. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I spoke little at meals, stayed out of conversations, and avoided being in the same room as my sister. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. One evening, as I sat alone reading, she leaned against the doorframe with that familiar smirk on her face. "Still upset about your little box?" she teased. "Come on, it was a joke. You're too sensitive." Her words dripped with mock sympathy, but her eyes were cold, gleaming with the satisfaction of getting under my skin. I didn't answer. I closed my book calmly and walked past her without a word. That silence was different from the silence at the dinner table. It wasn't submission anymore. It was rejection. A quiet refusal to give her what she wanted. My reaction, my humiliation, my pain displayed for her entertainment. For the first time, she didn't get it. The days stretched into weeks, and slowly, my withdrawal became more obvious. I stopped sitting at the family table for dinner. I stopped engaging in their chatter. When my parents asked if I was busy, I simply said yes. When my brother teased me, I ignored him. When my sister tried her little jabs, I walked away. The more I pulled back, the more I realized how little they noticed me when I wasn't there. It was both heartbreaking and liberating. But late at night, when the house was quiet, the weight of it all still pressed on me. I lay awake, replaying years of small humiliations, the birthday where my gift was mocked, the family trip where I was left out of the photos, the countless times my ideas or achievements were brushed aside while my sisters were celebrated. The dinner box was just the sharpest blade, but there had been many cuts before it. And together they told me a story I had refused to accept. I was never really seen as part of them. One night, as I stared at the ceiling again, a thought came to me, simple but clear. Why am I still trying? For years I had bent myself into knots, trying to be acceptable to them. I worked harder in school, hoping for praise. I tried to be helpful at home, hoping for appreciation. I kept my head down, hoping to avoid conflict. And yet, here I was, reduced to a scribbled box of dry food, mocked and humiliated. If all that effort had earned me nothing, what was the point of continuing? It was a terrifying thought, but also freeing. Maybe I didn't have to keep trying. Maybe I could step away, live my life on my own terms, and stop measuring my worth by their standards. Maybe the absence of their approval wasn't the disaster I had always feared. It was an opportunity to define myself without their shadow. The next morning I looked at myself in the mirror differently. My eyes still carried traces of tiredness, but there was something else there too. Something sharper, stronger. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see someone pitiful. I saw someone who had survived cruelty, who had endured silence, and who was still standing. My sister had wanted to humiliate me into submission, but instead, she had given me a reason to rise. When I passed her in the hallway that day, she tried another dig, mocking my sour face. But I smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the kind that knows something the other person doesn't. She frowned, confused by my calmness. That moment told me everything. Her power over me only existed as long as I gave it to her. And I was done giving. As weeks turned into months, I started spending less time at home. I stayed longer at work, took walks by myself, met acquaintances I had neglected. Slowly, I built a small world outside their walls, one where I wasn't the butt of the joke, one where I wasn't defined by my sister's cruelty. It wasn't easy. Loneliness followed me like a shadow, but it was real and it was mine. And every time I remembered that cardboard box with my name scrawled across it in ugly black marker, I felt less hurt and more determined. Because that box, meant to humiliate me, had done the opposite. It had shown me the truth. And the truth was this. I didn't need their table, their approval, or their golden boxes. What I needed was freedom. And I was finally ready to claim it. The distance I created at home grew wider with every passing week, and though my parents and brother seemed content to let it happen, my sister began to notice more than anyone else. At first, she dismissed it as a phase. She made snide comments about my silent treatment, and told others I was being moody, dramatic, or simply trying to get attention. But when my absence from family dinners and gatherings became routine, she started to realize something deeper was happening. And if there was one thing my sister couldn't stand, it was losing her power over me. I had learned to make excuses that kept me away from the dinner table. Sometimes I claimed to be tired. Other times I said I had work to finish, and often, I simply didn't come home until after they had already eaten. My father would ask half-heartedly where I had been, my mother would nod distractedly, and my brother rarely noticed at all. But my sister, she noticed. Each time I wasn't there to receive her subtle jabs or to be the audience for her little performances, her irritation showed. I could see it in the way her smile tightened, the way her laughter became louder and more forced, as if trying to fill the void my absence created. One evening, when I returned home later than usual, I found her waiting in the living room. She was seated elegantly, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone. As I walked past, she spoke without looking up. "You've been avoiding us," she said, her tone light, but her words sharp. I paused but didn't answer, heading toward my room. She finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Don't think I don't see it. You're sulking like a child. It's pathetic." Her words once would have pierced me, but now they rolled off like water on glass. I didn't stop, didn't argue. I simply closed my bedroom door behind me. And for the first time I felt a flicker of something new. Not fear, not shame, but power. My silence was no longer submission. It was a shield. Yet even as I grew stronger, part of me still carried the weight of loneliness. Creating distance from my family freed me from their cruelty, but it also left me adrift. For so long my identity had been tied to them, even in pain. Without their constant presence, I felt both liberated and empty. I began to search for other ways to fill that space. I threw myself into work, staying longer hours, volunteering for tasks no one else wanted. My colleagues, who had always seen me as quiet and dependable, began to notice my effort. For the first time, I received small words of appreciation that weren't laced with sarcasm. A simple good job from my boss felt heavier, warmer, than any praise I had ever received at home. It wasn't grand, but it was real, and that reality kept me moving forward. Outside of work, I began taking long walks in the evenings. At first, they were just a way to avoid the house, but soon they became something more. The rhythm of my footsteps on the pavement, the cool night air, the sight of strangers laughing together in cafes or strolling with families of their own, it all reminded me there was a world beyond the walls I had grown up in. A world where my sister's voice didn't matter, where my family's silence couldn't reach. Of course, my sister didn't let me go easily. When I skipped another family dinner, she cornered me the next morning in the kitchen. "You think you're punishing us?" she scoffed, leaning against the counter. "Skipping dinners, acting cold, it doesn't change anything. You'll always be the odd one out. You'll come crawling back, you always do." Her certainty once would have crushed me, but now it only steeled me further. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw what I had missed for years. Her cruelty wasn't strength, it was desperation. She needed me in that role, needed me to be her target, because without me, she couldn't shine as brightly. She wasn't mocking me out of superiority. She was mocking me out of fear that I might stop playing along. That realization shifted something profound in me. For the first time, I didn't envy her. I pitied her. Because while she had the family's attention, their praise, their indulgence, she also had a hunger that would never be satisfied. She needed to humiliate others to feel powerful. I, on the other hand, was learning to find power in myself. Weeks turned into months, and the gap between us widened until it felt like a canyon. My parents noticed in small ways. My mother would occasionally suggest I join dinner. My father would grunt something about family unity, but neither pressed too hard. Perhaps they were relieved by the silence, by the absence of open conflict. My brother carried on as usual, barely paying attention unless he could tease me for being too serious. Only my sister fought against the change, her words growing sharper, her attempts at baiting me more desperate. One evening she tried a different tactic. She approached me with a smile, sweet and almost genuine. "I was thinking of doing another dinner night," she said lightly. "This time we could all pitch in. Maybe you could help me with the boxes." Her tone was friendly, but her eyes gleamed with the same cruelty as before. She wanted me back in the game, back in the role of her victim. I smiled politely and shook my head. "No, thank you," I said softly and walked away. Her face fell for just a moment, the mask slipping, and I knew then that I had won something she could never take back. I was no longer playing her game. But even victories felt lonely. There were nights when I sat alone in my room, hearing laughter from the living room, and wondered if I had made the right choice. Part of me longed to sit with them, to belong, to feel warmth that wasn't tainted by cruelty. Yet when I remembered the box, the cardboard, the black marker, the laughter at my expense, I reminded myself why I couldn't go back. That box had been her message, and now this silence was mine. Slowly, I began to imagine a different future. One where my family wasn't the center of my world. One where I could build something of my own, relationships, friendships, maybe even a family of my own someday, that wasn't rooted in humiliation and silence. I didn't know what that future would look like yet, but for the first time I wanted to find out. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not just stepping away from her cruelty, but stepping toward something new, something mine. My sister had taken so much from me over the years, but without meaning to, she had also given me this, the push to finally seek a life beyond her shadow. The night I realized this, I lay in bed not with bitterness, but with a quiet sense of hope. My journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. And though my sister still circled like a hawk, waiting for me to stumble, I knew in my heart I was done being her prey. I was learning to soar on my own wings. The silence I had built between myself and my family had given me strength, but it also gave me clarity. Night after night, as I sat alone in my room or wandered the streets to avoid their table, one thought kept pressing itself into my mind. I couldn't live like this forever. Avoidance had worked for a while, but it wasn't a solution. The house I lived in wasn't a home anymore. It was a cage, and every time my sister's laughter echoed down the hallway, I was reminded of the bars. Freedom wasn't going to come from staying. It was going to come from leaving. The decision didn't arrive all at once. It crept into me slowly, a whisper that grew louder with every cruel glance and mocking word. At first, the idea of leaving felt impossible. Where would I go? How would I survive on my own? The family home had been all I knew, and though it was suffocating, it was familiar. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had already been surviving alone. Their approval, their affection, those things had never really been mine. What tied me to them wasn't love. It was fear. And fear was no longer enough to keep me chained. I began saving quietly, tucking away bits of money from work, avoiding unnecessary expenses. Each time I added to the small pile, I felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something of my own, something untouchable by my sister's hands. I started searching for small apartments online, scrolling through pictures late at night when the house was finally silent. Most places were modest, bare. But to me, even the tiniest room with 4 plain walls looked like paradise compared to the constant sting of humiliation at home. The day I found a place I could afford, I sat staring at the screen for hours. The apartment wasn't impressive. It was on the top floor of an old building, the paint was chipped, and the kitchen barely had enough space for a stove and a sink. But it had a door I could lock, a window that let in light, and most importantly, it had freedom. That night, I barely slept, my heart racing with equal parts fear and excitement. I knew what I had to do. Telling my family was the hardest part. I knew they wouldn't understand, not because they didn't see my pain, but because they didn't care to. To them, my leaving would feel like betrayal, like a rejection of the family unity they pretended to value. My mother would wring her hands and ask why I couldn't just let things go. My father would grunt about duty and loyalty. My brother would laugh, thinking it was a phase. And my sister would smirk, knowing deep down that she had driven me out, and she would twist that into another victory. When the day came, I waited until dinner. I sat at the table for the first time in weeks, and they looked at me with mild surprise. My mother smiled, relieved to see me there. My father cleared his throat, pretending he hadn't noticed my absence all this time. My sister raised an eyebrow, suspicious already. I let them talk, let them chatter about their day, until finally I placed my hands on the table and said it. I've decided to move out. The words dropped like stones in water, rippling across the table. For a moment there was silence. My brother laughed first, shaking his head. Yeah, right. Where would you even go? I met his eyes steadily. I already found a place. The laughter died on his lips. My mother blinked rapidly, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Move out, she echoed, her voice trembling. But why? This is your home. I wanted to say the truth, that it hadn't felt like home in years, that I was leaving because of the constant cruelty, the endless humiliation. But the words stuck. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew they wouldn't hear them. They would dismiss them, twist them, make them about my weakness rather than their behavior. So I simply said, I need space. I need my own life. My father frowned, his jaw tightening. You're making a mistake, he said firmly. Family is everything. You'll regret this. And then, predictably, my sister spoke. Her voice was dripping with false sweetness, her smile wide. Oh, let her go, she said, waving her hand. She's been sulking for months. If she wants to play at being independent, let her. She'll come crawling back soon enough. Her words stung, but not in the way they used to. This time they gave me strength. 'Cause she was wrong. I wasn't running away, I was breaking free. I met her gaze and, for the first time in years, I smiled. "No," I said quietly. "I won't." The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence. My mother tried to argue, my father scolded, my brother teased, but my decision was made. Their words couldn't reach me anymore. That night, I packed a small bag with the essentials, leaving behind the clutter of years that no longer mattered. As I zipped it closed, I felt lighter than I ever had before. The day I left, the sky was clear, the air crisp. I carried my bag down the familiar hallway, past the family photos on the wall, past the rooms that had been filled with both memories and pain. My mother stood by the door, her eyes shining with unshed tears. My father didn't come out of his study. My brother gave me a casual wave, as if I were leaving for a short trip. And my sister watched from the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For once, she didn't smirk. She didn't speak. She just watched me walk away. The taxi ride to my new apartment felt surreal. As the house faded from view, I expected to feel sorrow, regret, maybe even guilt. But instead, all I felt was relief. With every mile that passed, the weight on my chest lifted. When I finally unlocked the door to my new place and stepped inside, I breathed in the scent of old paint and dust, and it was the sweetest air I had ever inhaled. The apartment was small, bare, and imperfect, but it was mine. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence wash over me. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't cruel. It was peaceful. It was freedom. That night, as I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I thought about the dinner boxes again. I thought about the golden ribbons, the fancy meals, the laughter, and then my plain cardboard box with its scrawled name. And I realized something. My sister had tried to mark me as less, to remind me I was nothing. But in the end, that box had been the spark that lit my escape. She had meant it as an insult, but it had become my turning point. I smiled to myself, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The days after I moved into my new apartment were both liberating and terrifying. At first, I woke up each morning expecting to hear my sister's footsteps in the hallway or my mother calling me for chores. Instead, there was silence. That silence pressed on me like a strange weight, but unlike before, it wasn't suffocating. It was unfamiliar. I had never known what it was like to live without constant judgment, without eyes watching me, without someone ready to turn my smallest action into a mockery. I didn't realize how much of myself I had hidden away until there was no one left to hide from. The first few weeks were spent learning the rhythms of independence. I learned how to stretch a small paycheck to cover rent and groceries. I discovered the satisfaction of cooking for myself, even if it was just simple meals eaten on mismatched plates. I found a little cafe down the street where I would sit with a cup of coffee, notebook open, writing down thoughts I had never dared to voice before. Some days were harder than others. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake, if I would have been better off enduring the cruelty rather than facing the unknown. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the cardboard dinner box, the smirk on my sister's face, the way the air had felt so heavy in that house. And I reminded myself that I hadn't run away. I had chosen myself for the first time. With time, the fear faded, replaced by something stronger. Confidence grew in small steps. The first time I paid my rent on time, I felt powerful. The first time I hosted a friend in my tiny apartment, serving them tea and laughing late into the night, I realized I had created something my family's house had never given me: warmth. My life was still modest, still fragile, but it was mine, and that made it enough. Months turned into a year, and I began to notice how different I had become. My shoulders no longer slumped when I walked. My words didn't catch in my throat when I spoke. I looked in mirrors and saw not just a reflection, but a person I could be proud of. Sometimes, when memories of my family surfaced, they felt like scenes from another life, distant and fading. My sister's voice still echoed in my mind from time to time, sharp and mocking, but it no longer cut me open. It was only an echo now, loud once, but powerless in the present. I thought I had left them behind for good. I thought my story with them had ended the day I closed the door of their house. But life has a way of circling back to the places we thought we had escaped. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops and painted the sky in shades of gold, there was a knock on my apartment door. It froze my heart racing. Few people knew where I lived, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, the last person I expected to see was standing there. It was my sister. She looked different. Her hair was tied back neatly, her clothes pressed, her face carefully made up as always. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A flicker of unease, maybe even vulnerability. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with years of unspoken words. Finally she forced a smile. "You've made a life for yourself," she said, her tone light, but her eyes scanning the small apartment. I didn't invite her in right away. Part of me wanted to shut the door, to protect the sanctuary I had built. But another part of me, the part that still longed for answers, for closure, stepped aside. She entered, her presence filling the tiny space like a storm cloud. She looked around, taking in the simple furniture, the tiny kitchen, the second-hand books stacked in a corner. "It's nice," she said, though the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. We sat across from each other at the small table. For a while she talked about the family. How my mother worried about me, how my father was aging, how my brother had moved on with his life. She spoke of dinners I hadn't attended, celebrations I hadn't been invited to, moments they had shared without me. Her words were casual, but I heard the undertone. They had gone on without me, and now she was here to see what I had made of myself. Finally she sighed, her mask slipping. "I came here because," she trailed off, her hands tightening around her purse, "because I think I went too far that night. With the dinner boxes." Her eyes darted to mine, searching for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or proof that her confession mattered. "I didn't think you'd take it so seriously. It was just a joke. I didn't mean for you to." She gestured vaguely around the apartment. "To leave." Her words hit me in waves. Joke. That was what she called it. The years of ridicule, the deliberate isolation, the night she had branded me with that cardboard box. It was all in her mind a joke. My chest tightened, but not with the old pain. It was something different now. Clarity. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. "Do you know what that night did to me?" My voice was steady, calm. "It wasn't just about the box. It was about everything that came before it. Every word, every smirk, every way you reminded me that I was less. That night just made it clear. I couldn't survive in that house anymore." She looked down, her fingers fidgeting. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. "I didn't think you were listening," she said softly. "You always stayed so quiet. I thought you didn't care." "I cared," I said. "I cared so much it almost destroyed me." The room grew still. For the first time, I saw her not as the towering figure who had overshadowed me, but as a flawed, small person who hid her own weaknesses behind cruelty. I wondered what had brought her to my door. Guilt, loneliness, or maybe just curiosity. But I knew one thing with certainty. I didn't need her apology to heal. I had already done that on my own. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "So, can we start over?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. I thought of the years I had lost in that house, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the way she had smirked as I opened that plain cardboard box. I also thought of the strength I had found, the life I had built, the peace I had earned. I smiled, but it wasn't the smile she expected. "I don't hate you," I said. "But I don't need you in my life either. I'm not coming back. Not to the house, not to the old ways. I've moved on." Her face flickered with something. Hurt, perhaps, or anger. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then she closed it again. Slowly she stood, adjusting her purse. "I see," she said quietly. She walked to the door, paused for a moment, then left without another word. When the door closed behind her, I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, my heart steady. I didn't feel triumphant, and I didn't feel broken. I simply felt free. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. My journey hadn't been easy. It had been painful, lonely, and uncertain. But it had also given me something priceless. Myself. My sister had come seeking forgiveness, maybe even control, but what she had really given me was confirmation. I was no longer the person they had mocked, no longer the shadow at their table. I was my own person, whole and strong. And for the first time in my life, I knew the story was truly mine to write. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more powerful stories that will keep you hooked.